I am here. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Hajj Talib, and we're going to talk about his journey. And he's a friend of mine. He's been a friend of mine for, I think, well over a year, maybe closer. Actually, no more than that. Probably close to 2 years. He's currently a martial arts expert, author, and much more than that. So we're gonna go through his journey, and I'm looking forward to it. Hajj, Talib, how's it going?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you, Abdullah. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So let's start at the very beginning. You actually converted to Islam, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, a long, long time ago.
So
I
how,
took.
how did that happen? So tell us about your previous life before you were Muslim, and what kind of initiated you to become like, how was your previous life, and then how did you end up becoming Muslim? Like, how did that happen?
That's really quite a simple one, actually. I mean, I became Muslim so early. There's not really much to tell. I became Muslim when I was 18. So I mean, everything else was pretty much just childhood, school, and entering the job market. Sort of like that was pretty much it. But I mean, my family life was we weren't very religious at all. The fact that was that my parents got divorced when I was, I think, 13,
Right.
and my mom kind of got had another partner, if you like, or husband, whatever you want to call it. And he was a Turkish gentleman, and so consequently we had a lot of Turkish friends, Turks like hanging around our place, and so that was basically my introduction to Muslims and Islam, if you like.
Okay.
Very helpful kind of thing. And I wasn't really into religion at all. We were never religious. We never went to church as a family. So basically, but I had a lot of contact with that, and so what I was really into at the time was, because I've been doing martial arts from the age of 6. Like I was like starting with judo when I was a nipper, and sort of like just continue that. I mean, other people play football. I was just like, I just kept doing martial arts like judo, karate, kung fu, kick, all that sort of different thing. Not at the same time, obviously, like as I grew older, and so I was really more into like that kind of philosophy, like Taoism and Confucianism and Buddhism and all that. Didn't really understand it, but like I was just obviously because it had to do with the martial arts,
Right.
because them coming from sort of Far East. And anyways, that was kind of like, if you like, my exposure to religion, or if you even want to call it that, like religious thought or philosophy or ethics or morality or whatever. And anyway, so like when I was like 18 again, like we had a lot of Turkish friends and sort of family around, if you like. And I spent a lot of time with Turkish people. And the one thing that really got to me was like their hospitality.
Right.
Like this Muslim or Turkish hospitality was just like absolutely amazing. It completely blew me away, like compared to what I was used to from, my family.
And you
like,
were in UK? Where were you?
no, I was born and brought up in Germany.
Oh, okay.
I spent pretty much most of my adult life, like 25 years outside the country. So like, I haven't really spent that much time as an adult, like, in Germany. And anyway, so like what happened at the time was really, I was kind of like, going about my business, whatever. Well, I was a trainee as a chef, that was working in a restaurant. Like doing what I was doing, and at the time, I was the thing about me. That's also why I chose the Muslim name Talib. Is like Talib means students or seeker.
Oh, okay.
And I was always very curious. That's one of the things that and I'm really happy about that. I'm have that kind of inbuilt curiosity, like and like I'm always open for new things.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a sign of an open mind. Someone that's willing to leave the previous religion and willing to convert to another way of life. It shows that you're not the type of person that you will stick to something even when you know it's wrong. I mean, I think I think anyone that converts to a different religion, it's a very positive sign, in the sense that they're not stuck, right? Like they're not like closed-minded.
Yeah, I mean, it's either brave or stupid. So, some people,
That's
but
true. That's true. Sometimes.
I mean, for me, it was really more curiosity. I mean,
Okay.
that was really, and I didn't read the Quran. I didn't study Islam. I didn't have a dream of some kind of saint or prophet, or I didn't travel to the Holy Land or nothing like that. I mean, nothing like that at all. And so I was just kind of like, I like the food. I think my stomach converted me to Islam more than anything else. I mean, initially.
Yeah, that's funny. I guess as an 18-year-old, life is very different, right, than what it is now, right? So there's different things that motivate us. So what did Islam mean to you once you converted to Islam? I mean, you were Muslim pretty much your whole life, and Islam was a very big part in your life. I think it meant everything to you, right?
Pretty much. I mean, I was like, I mean, when I sort of converted, and really, I think really the word converted really describes it really well. Actually, a lot of Muslims sort of prefer to use the word revert.
Yes.
I don't really like that word at all. That sounds to me a lot like retard, actually. I don't really like that word because kind of, it presumes you kind of like, they take it from this hadith that you're born in fitrah, and that you're that's innate nature to worship God. And I really think that is a presumption to the greatest extent, really.
Right.
That you want to, if for instance, I mean, if you were born in India to like a Hindu family, like I mean, nature nurture. I mean, you're probably worshiping a whole myriad of God deities and all that sort of thing. And on the other hand, if you're born in China, you probably wouldn't be bothered with God at all. Nobody even would talk about God there, because you were more into like Confucianism, Taoism, all that kind of stuff. So it's really, I thought it's really quite presumptuous to kind of say that, like, every baby is born a Muslim, and if you give them half a chance, they get out like a kitchen towel and kind of go section. I think that's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I don't subscribe to that kind of revert. Yeah. I think it's quite. That's not. I would never sort of. I'm really uncomfortable with that, But but convert, I mean, that's really described because you're converting something from one state to another, and that's exactly what happened to me. I kind of totally, almost like, entirely dropped my set of values, culture, everything really, like a whole worldview, outlook on life, everything just totally turned into this into an Islamic perspective,
Right. And so your whole life was changed. How did your family take this? Your family's not Muslim, obviously, right? It was only you.
Well, actually, that's not quite true, because a bit about when I came home, I was quite casual about it. I said, "Hi, Mom," and by the way, I went to the mosque and I became Muslim, and she nearly dropped the dinner plates. I mean,
hey, Mom, I'm Muslim now.
Yeah, right. And she kind of like, why didn't you kind of tell us or me that you wanted to do something like that? I mean, wow, that was really, and particularly, it meant a lot to that Turkish gentleman my mom was sort of living with. I mean, he was not a religious man by a long shot.
Right.
And, and it was the beginning of a very cantankerous kind of relationship. We then, as I was learning about Islam, and, I was he was always, because he obviously went to the Quran school in Turkey and all that kind of stuff, and he thought he knew Islam. Right. And on a very superficial level, he probably did.
Yeah.
But, of course, you cannot compete with a convert, an 8-year-old, hot-blooded, dyed-in-the-wool, kind of like, I was like wearing like this red fez, and running around with that kind of stuff, and I was like, stuck out like a sore thumb, where I was living, and I was really into the Ayatollah Khomeini. I was not a Shia, but the Iranian Revolution had just sort of more or less taken place. That was in '79.
Right.
I became Muslim in '83, so that was still hot.
Okay.
And boy, he did not like that. I mean, it was like, so this cuckoo in the nest kind of thing. So this guy suddenly going like, and reminding him that, well, you say you're a Muslim, why don't you do this, or why do you don't,
Oh.
and he didn't like that at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, but then my brother finally actually converted as well about a year after
Oh
me,
wow.
and then my mother as well. So like and yeah, that was kind of unexpected.
Wow. Wow. Your mom converted and your brother too.
Yeah.
So
So
wow.
yeah, the only people who didn't convert, obviously my father who lived somewhere else, and my sister who also had moved out at the time.
Right.
But we suddenly had this kind of, yeah, no more pork and no more alcohol, no more, none of that kind of stuff, And I was like, yeah, but I wasn't like religiously like fanatic or anything like
Right.
this. It just obviously felt like the right thing to do at the time.
Right. Right. I mean, that's quite a story, and so you had quite an impact on your family. Then they saw you, and they saw you reading the Quran, and they were convinced.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what triggered it. I mean, yeah, certainly I've sort of changed. I wasn't really like a wild guy, like a wild kid. Like I wasn't like
Okay.
I wasn't like mischievous or like criminal or anything like that. But like I certainly they must have seen something in some
Right.
change
Right.
in my personality and my behavior, that prompted them to do so. I'm not really certain, to be honest, what it was, but like it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, it kind of seemed to me like they kind of went with the kind of the current kind of way, the zeitgeist, as they say.
Oh.
You know,
So
so,
so
and
so yeah, that's quite interesting. So were you into Sufism?
much later, yeah, much later, I got into that. Yeah, I had a couple of. I mean, obviously, I'm sort of 50. I'm 52 now, so I've got a few funny stories to tell. But
Oh, okay.
um, well, yeah, I actually was twice. I was involved in this like Sufi tariqa.
Right.
Once when I was really kind of young. I think it was 18, 19. First traveled to England, and I was part of. I don't know whether you know this guy. He's died now. He's passed on. A guy called Sheikh Nazim. He's from.
Oh, Naqshbandi?
Yeah, yeah,
A little bit.
Naqshbandi.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've seen some
Yeah.
videos of him on YouTube where there's like the guys are doing this and bowing down to him, and
Yeah,
he's like he has this ring and they kiss his ring and they're like going in circles around him and stuff like that.
yeah. It was kind of like I call it my hippie days. It
Okay.
was like yeah, we were like in London, Peckham, and this disused or converted church that turned into a mosque, and we were all like camping in that and sleeping in that place, and it was really like weird. Actually, I spent like a whole Ramadan in that church with this Sufi group with this kind
Wow.
of shit. It was intense, but when I got back to Germany, it was like I felt like I was on drugs or something. It really was quite. It was quite out of this world, to be honest. I
Yeah.
mean, I was like running around with like this massive turban, like 10 meters,
Oh.
with a turban cloth, with a coat and the walking stick, and I looked like something out of the Lord of the Rings. It was quite something actually.
Yeah, yeah.
And the second time around, it was a different tarika. That was a bit more serious.
Okay.
That was a bit more serious, and that was also lasted. I mean, for several years. That sort of went on for quite a bit, and it was very different, very much more serious. It was a lot more like like liquor and education. I had like a proper teacher, and it was like a real thing, education.
Right, right. It's interesting. How did you, so for me, I kind of dabbled in Sufism, kind of, but I ended up as a Salafi at the end. How did you end up going that direction instead of the other one?
I had to do with a group of people I was with at the time. So when I
Okay.
became Muslim, I met a bit of I told you I'm writing this book, and in my book I'm calling him the Zealot.
Oh, okay.
I met this guy who was really kind of a bit of a loner, but really so hardcore.
Right.
And he was basically involved with that group. Were mainly sort of, but was mainly not exclusively, but mainly based in the UK. And so I kind of through him, I kind of got hooked onto that, and it was really, really. I mean, I was, again, remember I was 18. I didn't really know much about the world. I didn't know much about Islam, and kind of like I kind of hooked up with that guy, and I pretty much sort of followed what he thought was best, and that's kind of why I went that direction, and not Salafi. Again, sort of, I later on, Salafism wasn't really in the 80s a thing.
Oh, really? Oh,
That's
interesting.
a relatively new development,
Right.
And so like there wasn't like a condition you could choose back then. Okay, that came later.
Oh, yeah, because the Saudi money and stuff and the whole
Yeah, yeah,
Quran science conference in the 90s, all of that happened later, I guess.
yeah, totally, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and by the way, something interesting you mentioned to me, which I forgot to kind of highlight, was you said that you never missed a prayer in 33 years. Was it 33 years?
Pretty much, yeah.
So you said all your 5 prayers every day for 33 years.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow, fantastic. That's commitment. And did you used to regularly read the Quran as well?
Yeah, no, being sort of a convert, been quite zealous and kind of enthusiastic, young, and I sort of threw myself at it. And I even went to I started to learn how to read the Quran like normal, just tajweed. And,
Right.
but then I went further still. I then attended some Arabic courses and ended up in Sudan. I lived in the Sudan for about a year.
Wow.
And I did like an intensive Arabic training course there. And so I came back, after that, and so I was really quite fluent.
Wow.
But the thing was, nobody at the time when I got back to Germany, there was no Arab speakers. So I kind of I didn't really want to lose it because I suffered from malaria when I was in Sudan and pretty nearly died actually from
Wow.
it. And I thought that is a too high a price I like to pay, for the kind of gaining that knowledge and just whatever, forget about it,
Right.
So I kind of, because there was nobody to speak Arabic, I kind of then I focused more on the written language. So I busied myself with the Arabic grammar, and I thought the best way to memorize, because if you can't speak it, the best way is probably to kind of teach it,
Oh,
So
nice.
I ended up actually offering Arabic classes. By then I was in the UK, and I was doing basic introductory Arabic courses, more focusing on in classical written language, for the Quran and Hadith and stuff like that. And I sort of I went kind of I suppose you could call it hardcore. Sort of went in there and did that. It was great fun. It was don't get me wrong. I was never really coerced.
Yeah.
I was totally immersed, and it did a lot for me. Don't get me wrong.
What did you get out of being a Muslim, and what are the good parts of Islam that you liked?
I think with the hindsight, looking back at those days, my dad he died as a career alcoholic, so and nowadays they say addiction is genetic.
Yeah.
So I think Islam has really helped me to protect myself from getting into drinking alcohol and maybe abusing it as well. So I think at the very sort of minimum level, but also it opened my mind to some completely different worldview, whereas everybody's just normal, subscribing to what's going on and whatever everyone else is saying. I always took a different approach, and that's, I think, being of this kind of conviction, having a different worldview,
Right.
believing in God, totally in an environment where that is not necessarily nurtured and supported.
Right.
I think a lot of people made fun of me and thought I was gone cuckoo or something like that,
And you were once joking when I asked you. You said you converted from consumerism.
Yeah. As I said, I didn't come from a religious background, but of course, kind of consumerism was the practiced faith, and the shopping malls were the temples we worshipped at,
Yeah.
But of course, nowadays, of course, Muslims are as good as consumers, if not better consumers than non-Muslims,
Yeah. So definitely, Islam gave you that routine. It gave you that, I guess, fear of God too, right? To be a good person. Is that what motivated you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. And wanting to, it's the whole desire that gets instilled in you, isn't it? To kind of somehow try to live a life that is pleasing to God, and this messenger, and like, kind of to fit in, to be a good boy, and to kind of like, it's sort of like, there's like your akhira bank account. You try to kind of like, really kind of gets a lot of
Maximize it.
interest, like doing all this, things. And of course, people call it charity, but it's actually quite selfish, isn't it? Because you're really doing it in order so like you get your bank balance up in the afterlife, kind of, so that you get like, and Allah's good books,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I was kind of fairly motivated. I wouldn't really sort of say fanatical, but then again, that's a point of view as well, isn't it? I mean, for some people, I must have been completely out of, off my rocker.
Right. No, I wouldn't use the word fanatic either, because as long as you were still integrated in society, you were still living your life. You still had your martial arts. Are you still teaching Arabic, by the way, or did you stop doing that?
No, what I'm doing right now, because I've kind of developed a method of teaching. I'm putting together an online course at the moment, and I'm putting that online on Udemy. I'm not sure. Do you know Udemy?
Yes, I've heard of it. Yeah.
I want to sort of like, I'm sort of developing a course, an Arabic course, especially for Quran and like in Hadith. So they just put that online and people can actually do it.
Wow. So that's not available yet.
That's not available yet. No.
Okay. Cool. But you're still doing the martial arts, and so you're working on a book, right? What's the name of the book?
Yeah. Yeah, that's my second book. I mean, I showed you that the first book I wrote was about how to set up and run a successful martial arts school, as I did when I was in England.
Right.
I did run my own school for 10 years, quite successfully, through one of the worst economic crises like in modern memory, like 2008.
Yeah.
I finished in 2014, and so I thought like. After 10 years, I kind of had enough of it. Sort of like I've done it and proven to myself I can do it for 10 years, and I wrote a book about it. And so that was my first book, and I published that in England. And my second book is more to do with like my journey, like from becoming a Muslim, traveling around the world, ending up as some kind of I've worked, as I said to you as well. I worked as a prison imam, like a visiting imam in prisons in England. I sort of was like an Arabic teacher. I worked as a khatib, and so that's quite a journey from some kind of like some kid in the north of Germany, kind of like going around the world, doing all this stuff, seeing all these things, meeting all these people, and like obviously never really quite anticipated it would change my life so radically.
Right. So you consider yourself like an agnostic Muslim now? Is that what you would? Is that one way you put it, or how would you describe where you ended up now? And
it's a good question, actually, and really, honestly, I'm currently still kind of grappling with the definition. I think this whole process, as you probably know yourself quite well, it's a process, and at some stage you probably end up more, perhaps, I don't know where, because you don't really know where you are, like you probably say, well, agnostic, I'm not so certain anymore.
Right.
And then, and then some, perhaps other people, would then, go into, remember Richard Dawkins actually had this scale.
Right.
Remember that?
Yes, the Dawkins scale.
Yeah, and then so like this atheists, Richter scale. And he's sort of like, and 7 is like, you're 100% absolutely convinced there's no God, there's no, there's no hereafter, anything like that. I mean, he himself actually says, Richard Dawkins said, like, I'm like level 6,
yeah.
Like, because you cannot prove that there isn't a God, and so like I don't really know where I put myself, but I would still kind of consider myself to be Muslim in the sense of like culturally,
right?
Because all my life I sort of spent as a Muslim with Muslims, and so that really has colored myself. There's an expression in the Quran which is I quite like, which is Sibghatullah, which is the dye of God.
Right.
The sort of like, as they call it in English, like the dyed in the wool, kind of like it kind of penetrates like almost every fiber of you.
Right.
It's immersed and all like saturated almost.
Right.
So in that sense, like as again, I wouldn't really call myself like a religious Muslim.
Right.
Because there's like obviously a lot of questions that I have now, and like probably yourself as well, because like you place them to scholars and more knowledgeable people, and often you get no answer, and if you do get an answer, it's really kind of like very superficial.
Yeah,
And
it's
kind of
definitely it's definitely well past the point of talking to a sheikh. And I know because I've talked to you and we've had these online discussions and, you know, in the mutual group that we're in, agnostic Muslims and friends. And, you know, from the type of, you know, discussions that we have, we know, you know, and I know that it's well beyond what any sheikh, especially someone that's basically studied Islam and only Islam from the texts and hasn't really looked outside of it, there's not answers for these things. So kind of what initiated this whole journey kind of away from, like, you know, conventional Islam? How did that start?
Well, as I said, I lived in England at the time, and I was running my own business, sort of like one man band type of deal, like, you know. And of course, you know what that means is that, you know, you pretty much you get up with it, you go to bed with it. You know, it's like you never really you are. You know, it's not really like you have a company. It's like you have a job, but you can't almost like even take a holiday from, because if you don't work, you don't get in, you don't earn.
Right.
Kind of. So you have to be there. Because at the beginning it was really great, because it was my dream to become a full-time martial arts instructor, kind of do this for a living. You know, like, you can't be serious. Like, that was like living the dream. You know.
Yeah.
But after a while, it kind of becomes, you know, when it becomes, you know, it's the fun is worn off after a few years, and, you know, I've achieved a lot in terms of my own personal progress. Like, you know, I became like a real, like, internationally recognized master in the art, and, you know, produced other black belts and instructors and stuff. And so, you know, once you kind of hit the ceiling somewhere, you know, anyway, so I got a little bored with it, but the business still continued, and you had because it was your income now, and you had to do it.
Right.
And so I think I kind of sort of suffered a bit of like a burnout at the time. You know, it was just too much.
Right.
I was just overwhelmed by it all. You know, I just lost kind of the interest, and now I couldn't do it, and there was a lot of stress involved, and money, and commitments, and, you know, students, and this, that, tax, and all that sort of stuff. So, and anyway, I mean, you know, I basically just, like, you know, had this sort of burnout that expressed itself kind of like, you know, anxiety attacks and, you know, stuff like that. You know, it was quite intense, actually. It wasn't just, oh, well, you know, take an aspirin and,
Right.
you know, it was actually quite severe. And it really, I mean, for me, that was a new experience, because for the first time I had the feeling as if I couldn't function anymore. And that wasn't, you know, I'm a martial artist. I mean, I get up again, like, you know, I don't stay down, you know. I mean, defeat is only temporary, you know. You get back up. And but this was really different. And so I kind of made a decision whether to go with medication or meditation.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I went with meditation, because obviously that was closer to, like, my background, like in martial arts. And I found a teacher to teach me how to meditate. And you know, it really did me a lot of good. And my teacher at the time in England, he sort of said, like, listen, if you're gonna do this, like, on a regular basis, you know, I'd just like to tell you, like, you know, your life is going to change.
Oh, wow.
Well, okay, I'm probably going to be able to sleep better, lose some weight, and, you know, whatever kind of, you know. But, oh boy, I mean, was that an understatement? I mean, that was unbelievable. I mean, like, this is only really sort of like, we're talking, you know, 3 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, and I'm no longer a martial arts teacher. I'm no longer a business owner. I'm no longer in England. I'm sort of like come completely away from, like, Orthodox Islam in that way, kind of like, and my life has totally, utterly transformed, you know. And yeah, that was that meditation thing. And the key thing for me that kind of did that was suddenly, you know, this, you know, what disappeared somehow in this process of, I don't know if you want to call it enlightenment, was this the disappearance of fear.
Right.
You know, suddenly I realized that fear, which is a central theme in religion, especially like Abrahamic sort of,
Right.
Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Fear is fear of God, taqwa, and khushu', and all this kind of stuff. is very crucial, fear ittaqullah, fear Allah,
Yeah.
And so what happened was then suddenly, and I really felt uncomfortable with this constant threat in the Quran of violence and torture and damnation, and before, I don't know, and I don't know whether it never really bothered me, but I mean then it really started to bother me. Why am I sort of like, why do I have to live in this sort of under this constant threat?
Right.
And if you don't do this, then, and if you don't do that, then, and God hates the unbelievers, and God, and it really, it became really extreme. And of course, I speak Arabic. It really stands out. I mean, it's strong language the Quran is using. And sort of that kind of, I was sort of marinating in that for a while, and then at the time, I started doing some traveling, and I went to Turkey for a year and was teaching English there. From then I moved to Malaysia, and just I was like moving around the Muslim world, and kind of, I don't know, maybe I was looking for a deeper meaning or reconnect or something like that.
Right.
And, it was really, and wherever I went, I mean, like, in Turkey and Malaysia, like, it was the same picture, like, it was uninspired and uninspiring.
Right.
It was like the same, or I mean, especially if you've been hearing this stuff like for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of litany, the same song, whatever, kind of like, and of course, criticisms and critical thinking and is not welcome.
Yeah.
Definitely not. And I kind of, at one point, I was saying to my wife, I said, like, I feel like living in an abusive relationship. Almost like Stockholm syndrome kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where, like, there's like, your daddy loves you, but, one step, if you do make one step in the wrong direction, kind of, this is, I'm like a 50-year-old guy at the time, and like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to live like that. And sort of, can you see, it was built like an onion, kind of like layer upon layer, kind of suddenly when like, and you kind of like, and then of course, how it is, once you sort of, you kind of step out of that, your the context
the
of
matrix.
your worldview, suddenly kind of trying to. And now, of course, meditation, I was still doing that, of course.
Oh, yeah.
It does also kind of help you to kind of create some distance between, your thoughts and your identifications, basically.
Right.
Because like I never really quite understood, although I was like in Sufis, tariqas and stuff. I never really understood this whole nafs thing, the ego, and it's always like described as this like donkey you should try to conquer and fight. It really never. Okay, yeah, I get it, like in an intellectual sort of way, but I don't know. It never really helped me to kind of become a better person. That. I don't mean better person in the sense of like stop doing wrong things or stop doing unethical things. I don't mean that.
Yeah.
But develop as an individual, as consciousness,
Right.
and and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that you cannot travel and arrive at these sort of things through a religion. I'm not saying that, but for me that never really happened. Although I was practicing for 30 years.
Right.
And anyway, so like with that meditation, I kind of it did this. It was just such a simple thing. Just sit there, and breathe.
Right. I found the same kind of wisdom as well in when I started studying mindfulness and Buddhism, and I'm seeing something very different than the Abrahamic religions. Like I think even though Sufism I think has some of those attributes like you're saying of this nafs, it's never from the same perspective of like distancing yourself from your thoughts. It's more about distancing yourself from your desires. It's like almost a different perspective, right?
Aestheticism is like aestheticism, you become an aesthetic, kind of, like, renouncing the world kind of thing, like,
Yes.
And I get that. And of course, like, well, if you live in the 21st or 20th or 21st century, then, and, it's not that easy to kind of like, just go out into the desert or up on a mountain. Do you know what I mean? For starters, you don't get Wi-Fi. So like, how can you even reach enlightenment without Wi-Fi? So I'm joking, but it's certainly it put things in a different context, and it really sort of like I because I consider myself to be a good person,
Mm-hmm.
and like was trying to kind of do the right thing and do my prayers and fast Ramadan, and I went to Hajj like twice even,
Oh,
and
wow.
and really sort of like try to my hardest kind of thing, and
Yeah.
still I felt this constant threat, and I was uncomfortable with that, and that was kind of like you kind of see the mechanism and kind of what happened then, and as I said, like I was like one aspect where I was like trying to really almost desperately trying to find Muslims I could talk to about enlightenment, spiritual awakening, sort of like this whole idea of like, thought identification, that what it really is, that, that really your attachment to certain outcomes and certain ideas and certain ideologies and expectations, that's really what kind of creates misery, because you identify yourself with it and then it's taken away from you and you get upset.
Right, right.
And I've never really sort of had that presented to me like from a Muslim background. And
Right.
I met one guy in Malaysia, and who kind of also read some of these traditional, the spiritual teachers. Like I'm not sure whether you heard about Adyashanti.
Oh, just a little bit.
Yeah, he's he's like from Los Angeles. He's like an American kind of spiritual teacher. And like this guy, wow, I one particular book I read that's totally saved my life, and of course, the man himself, Eckhart Tolle. I'm not sure whether you know him.
Definitely, I read his book. Yeah, Eckhart Tolle. Yeah.
Amazing. Completely. That guy is absolutely on another level.
Right.
So I mean, that guy I met in Malaysia, he actually had heard of these things, and I was like I was talking to him like, why is nobody teaching this? I mean, this is not some far out stuff. This is really basic,
Right.
Really going to help you with yourself living a more conscious, fulfilled, happy life,
Right.
And he said, yeah, you're right, because and he was like still like me as a convert, and and he was sort of also like a teacher and imam and stuff, and he was saying, yeah, but I'm sort of, the problem with Muslims is if you come from anywhere outside Islam, any other source than not Quran or Hadith, they won't take it from you.
Yeah.
And especially like particularly with spiritual kind of teachings,
Yeah, that's a big problem in the Muslim community, where I used to doubt this too when I was early Muslim. I was like, certain things I would read, you'd have certain Muslims tell you, oh, but why do you need to read better way to live your life, or 15 ways to make friends, and like all of these type of books, right, to influence, like Dave Carnegie, anything like that. They're like, oh, why do you need to read that? We have everything we need in the Quran and Sunnah. For this 7th century book and this 7th century man that was living in a specific context and time and place. Apparently, there's all of the wisdom you need for all of eternity. And I used to be confused about that too. I was like, does that make sense? But thankfully, I didn't limit myself only to the Quran and Sunnah, and I was able to go outside that. So that's something you experienced as well? Like anytime you brought up anything, it was like, no, haram, right?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, you get that kind of like because obviously people are who kind of they don't know what you're talking about. Most Muslims, most people who live in a particular worldview, whether you're a devout Christian or devout Muslim or devout Jew or whatever, you never look above the parapet. I mean, you're very much sort of like this sort of confirmation bias. You look at the stuff that confirms what you're thinking already. Very few people are interested in challenging their current belief or thinking.
Right.
Very few people are interested in that. Very few people, because the thing is, it will provoke change, and change is painful, and it can have some very serious consequences, like particularly with people leaving Islam.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally traumatic for some people. They have to literally decide to leave their families, get divorced, never see their children again. I mean, like, it's extreme, and not even talking about death threats, even, like, I mean, come on. Yeah. I mean, that's like, it's extremely courageous, to say the very least, kind of for somebody to, particularly if you come from like a Muslim family, if you live in a Muslim country,
exactly.
I mean, I cannot even begin to imagine what that is like.
Exactly. And, me and you, we're lucky because we're able to kind of do what we want, right? Like we don't. I'm in a very liberal Muslim family. Your family obviously is okay with you doing whatever you like as well. And obviously, we're both grown men. We're living in the West. That's one thing I personally love about the West is, we have this sort of tolerance for people to be who they want to be. Even if it's whether you're gay or whether you're straight, whether you want to be a Satanist or whether you want to be a Buddhist or whether you want to be a Muslim. You have that right to be who you want to be, and nobody's going to hurt you just because you don't want to go by the official religion of Britain, which is, Christianity. I mean, yeah, I can say Christianity sucks all I want, and nobody's going to hurt me. I mean, some people might want to hurt me, but it's officially protected under law that you have the right to say that I don't agree with this point of view, right?
And plus, of course, it doesn't really help their own cause to kind of like suddenly issuing threats.
Yeah.
I mean, like, really, like, hello. I mean, you're talking about Islam, salam, peace and harmony, and then you sort of like somebody says something you don't like, and I kill you. That's that puppet. The failed terrorist.
Yeah. So I'm interested. So I want to hear a little bit more about the meditation thing, because I think that's in the kind of ex-Muslim community, let's say, I feel like people are wondering what can they do now that they've left Islam and they don't have spirituality anymore. Like for me, this Eckhart Tolle, I forgot the name of his book now, but his book was fantastic. And who else did you recommend, you said, for learning about meditation?
Adyashanti.
Adyashanti, okay.
Adyashanti is Adaya and then Shanti, Adyashanti, something like that.
I found him, Adyashanti, Adyashanti,
And he talks about like this. What I like about Adyashanti in particular is that he talks about non-abident enlightenment, because that you have like states of enlightenment, but they're perhaps non-abiding. It could lessen or maybe even completely go away. But anyway, once you initiated that process of realization or spiritual awakening, it's something that will certainly continue to be part of your life. And he even explained that in his own sort of life journey, where he had realizations and awakenings. But there was like, but we're talking about plural, okay? But there was like stages that then lessened again and came back, and and he's really amazing in the way he, as a Westerner, when he talks about like sort of Buddhist and spiritual teachings in a context that Westerners can understand it. And I really, if you ever had a feeling of like you suddenly you kind of challenge it, an awakening. It can really happen quite suddenly, and almost like without meditation even. Like there's people who just wake up, and don't know what they're supposed to do with it.
Yeah.
And Adyashanti is a really good person who can help me on when I had that really which was kind of caused through this crises, through this burnout. Suddenly things happened. I didn't really want that. I was not very pleasant, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I didn't ask for it. I was quite happy where I was, and it did happen. And then suddenly it kickstarted everything else. Of course, with hindsight, it's great because you develop further. You grow as an individual, become more conscious and aware. Which is, I think, in some ways, you got to ask yourself as a religious person. I mean, what is the purpose of your religion? I mean, is it like it means to an end or an end in itself?
Right, exactly.
And that's kind of like my own development has always kind of gone sort of hand in hand with the martial arts and Islam. And I had that other thing that kind of went on alongside with it. And for me as a martial artist, I always did ask myself similar questions. Like when I was teaching a particular style of martial arts, do I do this because I'm a purist, or I'm a stylist, or I'm exclusive, like committed to this style, to this teacher? Or, because I was teaching it, and like, can I really send people out in the world thinking they can defend themselves, but actually when sort of the proverbial mess hits the air conditioning, suddenly they just die quicker, because I show them rubbish.
Right.
So in a similar sort of way, what's the purpose of being religious? What's the purpose of being Muslim?
Yeah.
Is that just to be Muslim? And just go become a consumer, kind of, like everybody else. You just say what everybody else is saying. You're engaging in the same kind of mindless behavior. You propagate truth. You talk about people behind their back. You kind of do all these things.
Right.
Okay, and then you still call yourself Muslim. And I was like, at some point, I was always kind of thinking, like, obviously still while I was more religious, and like, look, hey mate, if this is not really obviously not working for you, you're doing all these prayers, you fast all this time, like, but you're still a dick. So it's not really working, is it? Why don't you try something else? You know what I mean? Because obviously it's what's the point?
Yeah. And again, one thing that really amazed me when I read The Power of Now, that's the name of the book someone mentioned, it's called The Power of Now. I was like, as a Muslim for 15 years, I never heard this stuff before. And with Islam, it's always like, don't do this because, you don't want to make God angry. Basically, you want to become a better person, but at the end of the day, God will give you the reward for that. You be good, and you'll get this sort of benefits, and including God's pleasure, and you'll go to paradise, and sometimes it's even like you can intercede for people and save them from hell. But there's this concept of detaching yourself from your thoughts. It's an ancient idea that comes from humanity figured it out at some point. It's expressed in Buddhism. This idea of you are not your thoughts. What you're thinking is not you, right? And this was such a radical idea for me. And this whole idea of detachment from desire, not from deferring your desire to paradise. Then you get your virgins, and then you get your wine in paradise that doesn't intoxicate for some reason, which makes you wonder why you even want to drink it.
Don't forget all the sex orgies.
Yeah, so it's a completely different reason to kind of better yourself. It's not like I'm not doing this because I don't want to be punished, or I want to be. It's more like I become content by distancing myself from my thoughts and my desires, and it's a completely different perspective, and it's eye-opening when you hear it. You're like, wow, like. And people sometimes say that, oh well, you're just replacing one religion with another, but the thing is, you don't need the dogma for that, right? Like, you can take the mindfulness out of Buddhism, and you can say, forget the wall. You don't even need to believe in reincarnation. You don't need to believe in karma. You don't need to believe in any of that stuff. You can actually do this, and this thing will, like you said, it actually changed your life. There's actual science behind this, right? And you said it changed your life in a way that you never expected.
Yeah, completely. If you meditate, I couldn't meditate to begin with. My wife was always like way ahead of me, and she's always like trying to get me to meditate and stuff. And I just 3 minutes and I was off, because I was like thinking about marketing ideas and the book titles I could come up with, and I could never focus on anything for very long. Like attention span of a very nervous housefly. But but then but I think a lot of times what happens is, for many people, I'm not trying to make like a sweeping statement, but for many people it tends to come with a certain crises of some either health or faith or relationship or something like that, something very, very serious that kind of challenges your status quo, challenges your worldview, just challenges you as a person living, existing, really, the basic, like, who am I really? Like, really, I'm not what the labels that people have put on me, like, I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm a Muslim, I'm an engineer, I'm a student. That's what you do. These things are kind of stuff that happens to you, okay? That's not who you are.
Right.
And the meditation just helps you just to kind of create that gap, like between your thoughts, and because we all are totally busy with repetitive thinking. We think there's like thousands and 10,000 thoughts that kind of, are like going through our head like constantly every day, and most of them are repetitive. They're completely unproductive. Okay, and the thing is, and first of all, then you realize that all that noise is like two or three radio stations going off at the same time. That is that white noise almost. That is not who you are. Okay, that's not you. You are not what you think and what you think you are.
Yeah.
And once you sort of realize it, you suddenly you'll be able to kind of, almost like in a cinema, kind of sit back and observe your thoughts. And before you were like in it, like you were deeply involved. But now you're able to sit back and observe your thoughts, and suddenly you realize, hey, there's me and there's my thoughts. And that's quite a real kind of profound realization to get to that point. And of course, it does go. I mean, that's just the beginning. I mean, Eckhart Tolle sort of said it once. Once you understand what I'm talking about, it's too late. Your spiritual transformation has already begun. Okay, there's like no going back. It may take the next 30 years or something, but it might just take 30 days. But once you understand what I'm talking about here, you're on your way. Basically, something has clicked, something has happened. You see. And for me, for the longest period, whatever, kind of, what's on TV, kind of, I'm not really, I prefer more noise, not just the noise in my head, I want the noise outside my head as well, please give me, and that's really quite profound, kind of, like, once you understand that, and, now we kind of have moved into a time as well where this knowledge just, is quite accessible. I mean, and you don't have to really sit down and meditate for half a century, look at a cave or sit in the cave and completely separate yourself from the world. It's not necessary anymore. There's something going on in humanity as we are evolving, our consciousness. We are evolving, and you can see that by all the stuff that's going on, because if you want to call it like that, the dark forces, people are just not interested in peace and harmony and spiritual growth. They were really, really, really busy, kind of trying to maintain their influence. It's very visible for me, at least, I think. And so the spiritual thing, and again, once you break out of these confinements, I mean, again, like with family or religion, again, like I think I owe a real huge debt to Islam. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am now if it wasn't for Islam and me being a Muslim. It's very clear.
Right.
And I would never actually sort of badmouth Islam or what it has done for me. Is just made phenomenal. And I mean, there's all kind of like speculation of what could have been or whatever. But I'm immensely grateful and I'm very happy that I don't regret that I have undertaken this journey and where it has led me.
Right.
So I'm sort of and to be honest, it was a lot of fun. Most of the time.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of good things in many religions in the world, and I think a challenge now as humanity is to try to take the best that we can find and extract them. Like for me, the whole mindfulness, like to me honestly, when I learned about mindfulness, I was like, wow, like this would have helped me. This would have helped me a lot, rather than just being a drone, like a Muslim drone, Muslim robot for 15 years. Allahu Akbar, bow down.
You see, Abdullah, at the time, if somebody would have come up to you and would have talked to you about these things, you probably would have like, astaghfirullah, brother, what are you talking about? This is bid'ah, get away from me, you Satan in disguise. I don't want to know you. You kind of, you wouldn't have been ready for this sort of stuff.
And
you grow into that, so it's kind of a bit, I think it's a little problematic to kind of say, well, I could have benefited. You probably could.
Yeah, my dad tried to get me into meditation many times, and he used to tell me, the way you're following Islam, the Islam you're following, it doesn't seem very spiritual, and you should do some meditation. I was like, nah, I don't need meditation. I'm doing namaz, like salah. That's my meditation, right? And it's like, it wasn't like it was just like moving my body like up and down. It wasn't meditation. It wasn't mindfulness. I didn't have that, and so you're right. Like even if someone offered me that, my eyes weren't open. I wasn't ready. And so, I do think that some people, do you agree that some people do need religion in their lives?
It seems like it, obviously. I mean, you attract what's kind of like what resonates with you, isn't it? And if people sort of, if they have gravitate towards religion, then obviously it's part of their journey. I mean, who am I to deny anybody their particular expression? But again, I found that religion is an extremely individual and individualistic experience.
Right.
And it's kind of like to to kind of make this, the problem with like particularly converts or zealous people, they always try to speak in absolutes.
Right.
That it's absolutely this and it's absolutely that, and it doesn't mean that for many people. I mean, I was fortunate enough. I have traveled around the world and seen a lot of Muslim countries.
Right.
I lived in a few, but I've been to Morocco and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Sudan and Egypt and places like I've seen a lot of different places. And everybody and every culture, people where I had a different experience and expression of Islam. There is no, I think one of the most pernicious things is this, this neo-Orthodox Saudi Wahhabi kind of thing that's been propagated through the oil money.
Yeah.
And I think it's really pernicious. I mean, and Islam, if you look back at the history of Islam, Islam has been incredibly more tolerant, incredibly more diverse, incredibly more sort of like, embracing other things. I mean, if you look at the history of Islam in Afghanistan, which previously was a Buddhist country,
right.
They have adopted a lot of ideas that are kind of cross-fertilized.
Mm-hmm.
Not in terms of like, dogma, of course, I'm not talking about that, but in terms of culturally. And, they because of they had the benefit of these other sort of the other way of thinking, it kind of influenced Muslims in that particular part of the world, and it is an enrichment.
Right.
And unfortunately, what we've seen now with the Taliban and all of that, it certainly is kind of, really has not been of great benefit to the Afghan people at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Like, what do you think about God now? Like, in terms of God, in terms of the universe, in terms of how it was created, in terms of whether he sent any, I'm guessing you don't believe in any other religion now, so you probably don't believe that God sent any revelation. How do you see the world now, and in terms of God, where does God fit in? Is there a God, stuff like that?
I mean, the word God is a very, very overused term, an abused term as well. I mean, everybody talks about God. Nobody knows what it means. Everybody, a lot of people claim to know what God is and what he thinks and what he wants. Personally, I mean, I do kind of think that there's a creative force in the universe. And that's, I think predominantly, if you talk about God, I personally think about creativity, and rather than the creator God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And for me, born out of my own experience, I think the revelations or these books or openings or whatever you want to call them have certainly got a lot of truth in it. And the Quran is an amazing book, and it has a lot of very, very compelling things in there, no doubt. So does the Bible as well, and
right.
The Old Testament. And of course there are problematic passages in there as well. And everybody just picks and chooses, isn't it? So everybody, it's like a sort of like a salad bar, isn't it? Everybody just likes to take things they like and have their own mix. And of course, the non-Muslim and anti-Muslims or anti-Muslim bigots or Islamophobes or whatever you want to call them, they kind of do the same thing. They go to those other verses and say, well, look, but you could easily go to your Old Testament and go like, whoa, this is like, but So for me personally, have you heard of a Muslim scholar? The very famous imam of Islam, called Imam Malik ibn Anas, Medina. And there's a very beautiful story when a man actually traveled a long, long way, I think, from Damascus to see him in Medina, and he had like a whole catalogue of questions.
Yeah.
And he sort of asked him all this question, and really, I think was like a few, I don't know, 100 questions, or I don't know, it's not, whatever, how many it was, but he only really, I think, answered one or two. And for the rest, he just said, I don't know.
Yeah.
And he just kept saying it, just kept saying, I don't know. And I think that's a fantastic example to kind of like keep your trap shut and just, because you don't really know.
Yeah.
And in the story, the guy said, look, I've come all the way, like back then, like traveling from Damascus to Medina, that's a long journey. And so I've come here to meet the Imam of Medina, the most famous scholar, and all you're telling me is, I don't know. What am I supposed to tell the people when I go back to Damascus? And he said, I don't know. So,
tell him Imam Malik said he doesn't know. That's what he said, right?
And I think that's a really, really fantastic little anecdote. And, to be honest, I will not presume to speak that I know God or know the mind of God or the will of God, nature of God, anything like this. I can only say for myself, I think that there's some level of connectiveness, but I would not put God into a human definition or a dogma. I think, and it does say that in the Quran, so laysa kamithlihi shay. I mean, nothing is like, he's nothing like anything.
Right.
Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. He's not like anything, or anybody.
Right.
So that's, for me, that's I kind of stick to that. I mean, if God is like nothing we know and can experience or express, we better keep our mouth shut, because we're too busy, obviously, with our own consciousness. How can we possibly try to encompass, the thing that the driving force that is behind everything? It's beyond comprehension. And the best thing, and most wise people, most illuminated and enlightened people have consistently either kept quiet or just said, I don't know.
Right. That's a great answer. Yeah, me personally, I'm kind of leaning towards atheism, but I'm definitely okay with the idea that there is some sort of creator entity, creator God. I'm completely agnostic as to whether this God has a personality, has any characteristics, has any sort of basically personality, because it makes me wonder, right? Like if God does have some sort of personality, how is it that the world we live in has so much suffering, right? And it just seems like so much unnecessary suffering to me. Yeah. In terms of if you look at humans, then there's human caused suffering, and then of course people will say, well, that's because you guys have free will. But then it's not just human caused suffering. There's natural disasters, there's diseases, there's animals that have to eat each other, animals like whales, like whale cubs, whale seals that will rape the little baby seals, and it's just so much horror in nature. It's just what we see is that we are barely surviving here on this little rock somewhere in the universe, in some corner of the universe. Not we used to think we were the humans thought we are the center of the universe, we're the most important thing that exists in all of the world. Everything here is just for us. This world was made for you, the milk in the cows was made for you. It's the sea was made for you. Everything was, the fish were made for you to eat, and the animals for you to tame. It's this kind of narcissistic worldview that everything was made to serve us. And when we look at the world, it's almost like we're barely surviving in this little rock. It's just a matter. It's just a little bit of a thin layer in the sky that's protecting us from the gamma rays that don't destroy us and cause us to all die from cancer and radiation poisoning. We're like one earthquake away, a super earthquake away from all being annihilated, or one super germ that comes and just wipes out all of humanity. It's just, I feel like, maybe it was just a cosmic accident. That's sometimes I wonder.
Maybe. But the things and those are all questions, and people have been asking themselves these questions for thousands of years. But the one thing we can say is that there's something like consciousness.
Yeah.
And we are conscious beings, and we can go towards that consciousness, and actually, as they say in this sort of enlightenment business, they sort of like, they say like, that consciousness, you can, when you awaken, wakes up to itself. And, and you are just in the way. You basically like with all your thoughts and concepts and ideas. Okay. And once you remove yourself and you kind of like, you become, you wake up.
Yeah.
And the Prophet Muhammad himself said that as well, like, die before you die. I mean, like, it's kind of like before you die, wake up basically, because, we are living in an illusion. And, we need to wake up to, I wouldn't call it reality, but it's just consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and just become aware. And once you become aware, things will look very, very, very different. And this, it's very difficult to describe that, but if you never actually tasted honey, you cannot explain what the taste of honey is
Right.
to someone, but for me, as a conscious human being, who is constantly trying to learn and, develop and grow, that for me is the challenge, to kind of not to get out of my own way and not create suffering for myself or other people, just by being aware. And, look, I mean, you brought up some very valuable, very valid sort of questions and issues, but, I'm so busy, and this is such a huge job that will take me for the rest of my days, that, I wouldn't even presume to kind of have answers to any of this sort of stuff, I mean, it's you see when people sort of say, what can I do? But the thing is, you mustn't underestimate that, it seems like, oh, well, like there you are, go back and hide in your shell, you look after the beings, look after number one. I'm not really saying that. I mean, what it actually does, I mean, if you look at any religion or movement or, ideology, it always started with one person or maybe a couple of people. And that is and if you really want to see a real transformation, real change, then change yourself. And you'll be so surprised when once you have made changes, and I mean, you cannot, for most part, can't help being around other people, and they will probably notice that you have changed or that there's something about you that kind of like, hey, what is that? You don't seem to be so phased and afraid and anxious by all the stuff going on around you, or like, everything to try to eat you or exterminate you, or can take your job, your wife, your money, whatever kind of thing, Why, hey, why, are you on drugs, or is there something else that's going on? And if you can just perhaps, and then that's where it starts, that you then raise awareness and consciousness in other people.
Right.
And, really quickly what happens, Abdullah, is that, sort of individual differences kind of tend to go away really quickly. They become very insignificant. And, it's really borne out by the fact that if you look at masters, like, spiritual masters of any kind of direction, whether it's Buddhist or Muslim or Christian or any kind of, they all meet somewhere. They all talk about the same stuff.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. Like all the other stuff, the quarreling and quibbling and disagreeing and accusing each other, kind of that's really sort of like entry level stuff. That's kind of, you don't really want to be stuck in that sort of the kindergarten spirituality, like pointing the finger at everybody else, and not realizing there's always three fingers pointing back at you.
Yeah, exactly.
You really want to, I think that is, where it is at, and and of course, everybody finds different expressions for it. Some people call it God, other people call it consciousness, whatever works for you, kind of thing. As long as, in the end of the day, is it actually, getting you somewhere? Like, is it actually helping you as becoming a more enlightened, more aware human being, or is it not?
Right.
Then, may the chips fall where they may. If you can answer that question, and it's a really simple question: is it helping or is it not helping?
Yeah.
Either you do more of the stuff that works or less of the stuff that don't work.
Yeah.
Okay, it's quite simple that way. Quite utilitarian, and that's it. Everybody can answer that question for themselves. And yes, it does have implications. I fully realize that. Where it may lead. But then, you have to go your way. If you don't, you live a lie.
Yeah, yeah. And do you have any books that you'd like to recommend? Anything that you're reading or read in the past that helped you, other than the Quran?
Oh, yes. I mean, I read a lot of stuff.
So maybe specifically about, opening your mind away from the very specific truth of Islam. Was there anything that specifically helped you? I know you said, stuff on meditation helped you. Was there anything else?
I think the two things I already mentioned. There's definitely Eckhart Tolle is a very the Power of Now. That's an incredibly important book. A very crucial book to read. There's a book by Adyashanti. He said the end of the world as you know it. I think that's.
Okay.
And that's a really. But that was the book I was talking to you about earlier. When I had this upheaval kind of thing, when everything seemed to really crash in on you, and I was really struggling to cope, and this, when this awakening kind of takes place, and he describes it as well as it's not a pleasant thing, people are always thinking this spirituality and this tree hugging kind of feel good and hey peace and all that kind of stuff, but it's not what spirituality. Real spirituality is like. It's very destructive because it demolishes your previous worldviews and any assumptions that you may have about existence and reality. It will kill and absolutely and viciously it pull that carpet from under you, and so it's not a pleasant thing at all. And you must be, I think, you're really conscious and aware that watch out what you're asking for, because you want to be enlightened, you want to be aware, kind of thing. Good on you, okay? But then for many people, doesn't have to be traumatic, but it is really quite a process, and oftentimes I've sort of met people and read what people have said about that, and it's can be quite overwhelming. It's very substantial. It's not superficial. So Adyashanti, I would maybe have a look at him. You don't have to read the books if you're not into reading, but you look at his YouTube videos. Eckhart Tolle is absolutely the man. I keep coming back to Eckhart all the time. And I found even Eckhart, because he kind of speaks in a very kind of monotonous kind of voice, and it's almost you can meditate what he says. You just kind of sit there, shut your eyes, and just let him talk, and he really takes you to a different place. And he actually says that as well.
Yeah.
So that's a really good intro into meditation. If you really don't know how to do it, or you can't sit still for 2 minutes, listening to Eckhart, and that's really a good way to get started, I think.
Yeah. I guess being a martial arts teacher as well, you would recommend to people to obviously stay active as well. I guess it's all part of being a balanced individual, right? Spend some time with your family. Continue to be healthy in mind, body, and spirit, as they say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have any thoughts about anything you'd like to say to the Muslim community in general? Because I feel like, you've lived in many places in the world. You've been in Malaysia, you've been in Sudan, have you ever been to Egypt as well?
Yeah, I've been to Egypt, on my way to Sudan, got a couple of weeks.
Yes. So anything you'd think that the Muslim community needs to know, right? Or can benefit from, my concern right now for the Muslim community is in some places in the world, especially in Pakistan, there's no tolerance for different thought. It's just like you said, it's almost like they are their own worst enemies, in a sense that people are seeing that how intolerant they are, and you can't even doubt Islam, and it's creating this kind of dual identity in people where they don't believe on one hand, but they pretend they have to be Muslim, and it just creates this kind of nasty dynamic, right?
So, what is your question?
So, what advice do you have for the Muslim community? What things do you think the Muslim community needs to do to kind of improve, or to move on and make the world a better place?
I think really ultimately it's work on yourself. I mean, and if you really are there's this golden rule, isn't it? Treat other people the way you want to be treated.
Yeah.
I think, and that kind of applies throughout. I mean, if they would practice more of that, you know, working in the service of others rather than self-service, that would go a long way to solving a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So is there anything else? I definitely want to ask one more time about the book you're working on. So you have two books, you said? One is How to Start Your Own Martial Arts Business, is it?
No, that's kind of how to set up and run a martial arts school, which is kind of like, that was kind of my swan song, kind of like when before I stopped like doing that, kind of 10 years of experience, put into that book. And like, if you ever want to start a one-man band, it could be a dance school, it could be yoga school, it could be a martial arts school, it will help you kind of, get some ideas how to kind of do that. But the second book I'm working on right now is more to do with like, kind of stuff we've been talking about today. My experiences, some of the stuff I come across, my own personal realizations and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's a bit of navel gazing, if you like.
You know what? I can't wait. I definitely would love to read that book. I'm quite excited. Do you have any timeline for that?
Probably, I hope somewhere in the first half of next year. I'll keep you posted. Like maybe we can do another chat.
Okay, sounds good.
About, we can maybe introduce the book and talk about it.
Awesome. I think that'll be fantastic. So be looking forward to that. Any closing remarks you want to make? Do you want people to find you on certain social media, anything like that?
Well, I mean, if people want to contact me, I'm on Facebook. I'm sort of I'm also on Twitter, but I don't use it much. Facebook's probably the best.
Okay, so I'll post a link then after.
But as I said, like, I'm not a revolutionary, anything like that. I'm just an old kid who kind of seen a lot of stuff.
Yeah, no, it was an excellent conversation. I think we learn from each other, right? When we have these conversations, when we have these dialogues, and looking at different people's perspectives gives us all a wider perspective. I definitely enjoyed hearing about, like, I'm amazed at how much of an impact the whole meditation had on you, and it for me it's like I'm still kind of struggling with it. I haven't been able to get past the few minutes, and then I'm like bored. So I'd be really excited to. I'm gonna give it another try, and you know what? I'm amazed by your story and the change. And we had a very similar journey, I think, in many ways. But it's interesting how for both of us the mindfulness thing helped. I'm still not quite totally into that, but I want to get more into that for sure.
It's a working process, it's like anything else. If you want to play the guitar, you just have to keep at it,
Absolutely.
It really is very rather mundane and utilitarian. You just have to sit yourself down either before the kids get up or whatever, or you have to find that time, and it's got to be important to you. You have to make that time available and discipline yourself. It's actually easier if things are not going so well. Actually, if actually stuff really goes wrong in your life, you kind of, it's almost like flee to meditation because it gives you that that peace and quiet. But if things are pretty good, and you kind of like, you still haven't like left your tolerance for stress and pandemonium, then, it might be difficult to kind of, see the benefit in that. But yeah, as you said, it's I don't know, 5,000-year-old practice. I mean, it goes back a long time, and it's a technique, it's a technology that people have developed over all these millennia, and I can really only recommend anybody, whether you're a child, whether you're an old person, male, female, try it out. I mean, it has yielded immense results for thousands of people, and it's free, it doesn't cost anything. It's not difficult. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be beautiful. You don't have to be talented. Just sit down, shut your mouth, shut your eyes, and just breathe. That's all there is to it.
Fantastic. It's deceptively simple, isn't it?
Yeah, deceptively simple. It's simple but not easy.
Yeah.
As they say, simple but not easy.
Yeah. So the main advice you have is just keep it up, just practice, and practice makes perfect, right?
Yeah, but although it's not a competition, okay? Like, that's not where this is supposed to go, like in meditation. You're not competing with, like, it's funny actually because Adyashanti talks about that. He was like always trying to be the best meditator and to try to meditate for hours, like more than anybody else. Of course, that's very childish, because that's not where it is at, But yeah, it's this, it's the constant, the regular thing that kind of, makes an impact, like not the big splash.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much.